We're just going to bring you these live and exclusive pictures here from inside the presidential palace. What you are looking at right now is Taliban fighters inside the presidential palace. This is these pictures exclusive on Al Jazeera. We've been watching them for a few moments now, milling around the lush environs of the presidential palace. We're not sure if they're making an announcement yet, but the camera has been trailing those fighters as they make their way through the halls of the Afghan presidential palace, wandering up through the building, decked out in its finery. Of course, this after the Afghan president fled the capital. That's them taking their way through the marbled halls of the presidential palace, showing that's it's one of our Arabic colleagues who is basically showing, doing a quick show and tell around the presidential palace, where, of course, many Taliban fighters are accompanying him, with weapons slung over their arms. A very grand building, a building, of course, that played host to many dignitaries, and, of course, where the Afghan president was the one-time ruler of the land. I'm not entirely sure which desk they are sitting behind, but there it's almost like a family photo shot of the Taliban fighters sitting behind a very grand desk in the middle of the presidential palace. Let's bring in our correspondent in Kabul, Rob McBride. He's at the Al Jazeera bureau. When we get a translation, of course, we'll try and bring that up. But for now, Rob, we're just showing our viewers these fairly stunning exclusive pictures, I also have to add, from Al Jazeera, of Taliban fighters placing their guns on the desks, sitting behind the desk of, we assume that is the desk of the Afghan president. A fairly stunning turnaround of events in Kabul. You started the day certainly with the news that the Taliban fighters were surrounding the city. Now they're inside the presidential palace.
Absolutely. I mean, this has been a remarkable day of fast-changing events, and it continues into this Sunday evening. Yes, we saw earlier on this Sunday evening, in fact, still images of Taliban fighters inside the palace. Now we have moving images. We also have been seeing images of Taliban fighters outside the palace, posing for selfies with their fellow fighters, etc. So very much this has been a day that, yes, began with the encirclement, the siege of Kabul, pulling the noose tighter, if you like, around the city. The culmination, of course, of weeks of gains by the Taliban across Afghanistan, taking province after province, gradually forces falling back as provinces fell, and all of the focus, all of the attention, all of this great momentum that the Taliban built up, then being focused and directed towards Kabul itself. So this was the last remaining holdout of this government, as well as a couple of adjoining provinces and cities. But all the focus has been on Kabul. And then at the start of the day, we started to get reports that fighters were not only on the edge of the city, but were actually entering parts of the city, which really did raise the level of unease, the whole tension level. It was quite palpable. You could really feel that the presence of the Taliban was very close. And now we have had, despite an order earlier on Sunday that Taliban fighters should not go into the city, they should hold back, as we heard there, they should be restrained. There were reports of looting. We know that as soldiers withdrew, as some of the police officers we know actually simply got rid of their uniforms and put on civilian clothes. There were reports of various acts of looting around the city. We know that one university was broken into. So that seemed to coincide with this move by the Taliban to direct its fighters to actually go into the city, ostensibly to stop the looting. That's at least what they have said, to maintain law and order, countermanding, it seems, their earlier order to do so. So that's what we've seen. And in fact, on the streets, we have seen now where there used to be soldiers, where there used to be police, actual Taliban figures now taking over simple duties like directing traffic or stopping vehicles to do vehicle checks, to check who's inside, where those people are going, but very distinctly wearing the sort of the gab, the clothing of Taliban fighters. Just where we are here in Kabul, just behind me, this is the green zone. This is a heavily fortified area of Kabul. It's blast walls because it's around here that you have government offices and embassies and so on. Normally, you would have lots of army with Humvees mounting very big, very heavy machine guns. They all seem to have disappeared, and instead you have Taliban on the streets basically taking over those guard duties.
Okay, Rob, as you're talking to us, we're continuing to show our viewers these live and exclusive pictures from inside the presidential palace. There are phones being passed between the fighters. We're still trying to get a translation for you, but just to get a sense of what's happening. But we are certain now, that's confirmed, the Taliban are inside the presidential palace in Kabul. Guns on the desks, certainly posing there, it seems, for a family photo, an announcement of some kind. It will certainly come as a great shock, Rob, to many in Afghanistan. Over the last few weeks, people have been reacting with surprise, certainly, to the speeds of the takeover. And this, it seems to be a complete takeover now, does it not? They're brandishing now a bullhorn in order to make some kind of announcement there. But this is certainly a takeover. We had been hearing from the Taliban earlier that they would not enter Kabul. They were wanting a peaceful transition of power. How peaceful is it on the streets of Kabul right now?
Good question. It changes by the hour here. It has been fairly, I can say, there's been a certain tension throughout the day. We've had reports, for example, the burst of gunfire that was reported through the US Embassy with that message that US citizens should take shelter. Now, apart from that message, we heard nothing more about that particular incident. That got everybody very excited for a while, but then we heard nothing more about that. Having said that, just in the last half hour or so, in fact, just about 25 minutes ago, we did hear a series of explosions, 3 explosions just over behind us towards the US Embassy. And just as we came on air, in fact, there was a 4th explosion, again, in roughly the same direction. And we have, at the moment, absolutely no idea what those explosions were. If it was coming from the direction of the embassy, we can only speculate that maybe it was something to do with the evacuation of the embassy, because that's been going on all day here. We know that parts of the embassy are being cleared out completely. We know that files have been destroyed. There have been fires in there to destroy files and so on. Or it may have been those explosions to do with somebody setting explosives from outside. We have been checking social media as much as we can. One of the problems here is that normally we would get police reports about these things, but of course, in many respects, we don't actually have a police force at the moment. I mean, the very good question here at the moment is who actually is in control of Kabul? With the Taliban ostensibly taking over and trying to establish law and order, it would seem that on the streets, at least, they would be in charge. They are the people who are at the corners of the roundabouts, directing traffic, etc. But there's nobody actually for us to contact to say, what was that explosion? So we are sort of in the dark, so to speak. But there are troubling signs as we get into the nighttime hours here of Sunday into Monday morning. It is slightly uneasy. There are things happening that we don't quite know about, and we just have to feel our way as we go. But it is interesting that the changes that you have seen on the streets, that where we once had the army in their pillar boxes and with heavy machine guns guarding all of this area, which is this green zone, which has been traditionally over many years a real target for car bombers, for suicide bombers. All of those forces seem to have simply melted away, being replaced, as I said, by Taliban people on the streets doing those kind of duties. It's interesting also some of the other statements coming out of the Taliban this Sunday about the change in direction. With Ashraf Ghani gone, we had been talking about some sort of transitional government, some sort of change of power, that in theory Ashraf Ghani was talking with his close confidants about what kind of deal they could propose that would see a peaceful transition of power. Obviously, it would not include Mr. Ashraf Ghani being part of that. That was always accepted, I think, that he could never be a part of a new government. The Taliban would never accept that. But we had been expecting that there would be some sort of form of words that would go to the negotiators in Doha, that maybe they could ratify. That might lead to some sort of transitional government or a kind of a caretaker government that might then call, say, a lawyer jirga, one of these big gatherings of people being brought in from all over Afghanistan to discuss the shape and form of a new government. All that seems to have evaporated very quickly. We now are left wondering what exactly, what type of new government we're facing. And as far as some officials, Taliban officials are concerned, they are just talking about a straight handover of power. Why do they need to share power with anybody? There doesn't seem, in theory at least, anybody to share power with. So that, it seems to be what they are talking in terms of now, is a straight handover of power. And this evening, at least, we do seem to be seeing that, in reality, a straight physical grabbing of power, if you like, with Taliban fighters wandering around the corridors of the presidential palace.
Indeed, it's very hard to talk about power sharing when we see the power being held specifically in the hands of those who are sitting in the presidential palace there. Rob, you've been on this story all day. You've been out on the streets. You've been talking to people. People have been clearly very, very anxious about the rapidly unfolding events that have been happening. Just as we're still trying to sort this translation for you and for our viewers here, but just give us a sense of what people in Afghanistan have been saying to you and the team as these events have been unfolding.
Yeah, there is a lot of unease here about the Taliban coming back and taking over. I mean, it varies from place to place. In the Pashtun stronghold of the south of Afghanistan, they have a different view, if you like, about the Taliban. They will view it very differently. In more cosmopolitan areas, such as here in Kabul, which has been transformed dramatically in the 20 years since the Taliban were last in power, they will have a very different view again. I mean, there have been, as Ashraf Ghani himself said in his speech just yesterday, I think it was, that there have been remarkable gains that have been made in the past 2 decades or so. And you do see that. It is a much more cosmopolitan place that has been transformed into. You've had all of these influences from abroad. People are far more international, have a far more worldly outlook. So there is an awful lot of worry, concern, fear in some cases about having a return of this regime, and you will meet people of a certain age who do not have very nice memories at all of when the Taliban was last in charge here from the mid-90s until 2001. So there are concerns, and yet there is, when we've been talking to people in the last week or so, a gradual acceptance as they